Hello, this is Nikki. I just want to make a quick video about my experience with the TBR-119 from Gouhe. Not great, but we'll get into that. Basically, the TBR-119 is supposed to be sort of a rugged, man-pack style radio, sort of military style that harkens back to things like the PRC 150 and the 119 Golf. It's supposed to be able to do HF, VHF, UHF, and all that stuff, have a nice kind of sturdy mount for antennas on and all that good stuff. Mine's kind of modified. I've had it for a little over a year now, and so I replaced a few things. I made sure to check its performance against Mr. Brian C's TBR-119. He's been who I've been working a lot with on working out the kinks and figuring out what this radio is all about, because he also has one, and I'll direct you to his channel as well. But yeah, this is my experience with my TBR-119, and yeah, it's not great, but I'll split up into three parts, mainly just the software, firmware, and the customer support aspects of it all. With the software and the firmware, it is not great. It's super buggy. From what we've found, it has been sort of like it's a ripped version of some software that comes from a different radio, not sure which one, but it's very buggy. It does not work well with this system at all. Some things that my firmware does is that I cannot, my FM narrow band does not deviate. So when I transmit, I get a carrier signal, but I do not get any deviation. So basically, people can hear a carrier, but they don't hear my voice on the other end. And that's less than ideal. I can't talk out. I can't talk to a $30 Baofeng with my $2,000 radio. That's a problem. On HF, we've tested with Mr. Brian's radio when I was out and about with my X6100 from Gouhe. He tried to transmit on single sideband HF for an Invis shot, and he sounded terrible. He sounded like this really weird robotic speak and spell type thing. I could barely understand him. While when he switched over to his G9 or his G90 from Gouhe, he sounded fantastic. So the 20 watts that this thing emits on HF was getting to me. It was getting to me, but unfortunately it was not good, to say the least. So it can't transmit well on HF, and it can't transmit well on FM. And we even tried AM too. It's just bad all around. Not good. So firmware stinks. The manufacturers do send out periodic firmware updates. Not sure if they are anymore. I don't know if they're supporting this radio much more anymore because it's such a mess. But back when we were really trying and really working with the manufacturer to try and sort this thing out for them, they would send us firmware packages, mainly sent to Mr. Brian. We would load them, we'd test them in the field, and we would give feedback on what broke and what didn't. It's kind of a fun game of whack-a-mole of, oh, what part of my radio, what vital function no longer works anymore because of some weird firmware bug. They'd fix, the channel memories, but then the DMR would stop working, or they'd fix that. Something else would break. It's super, super fun. Definitely something I want, especially if I'm their target demographic in their advertisements as a professional or military setting. I've worked with professional military radio equipment a lot. This ain't it. All right. I could talk about the firmware side of things ad nauseum, but for brevity's sake, let's move on. The hardware. I just knocked this thing off. It's not stock. This is an actual Harris piece of gear. I tried to polish a turd. It did not work. Sorry. But yeah, the hardware, well, here's the thing. I bought my radio for about $2,000, a little bit more. It got to my house. I opened it up after, the 30-day shipping. I was super excited, and lo and behold, the HF connector for the antenna was broken out of the box. This little BNC file right here that's inset in this threaded collar was bent way to the side, to the point that I couldn't put on the supplied whip, nor could I put on a just standard little BNC guy to hook up to an external antenna. So that was super cool. My radio straight out of the box could not do HF. So what I did is, you can see this is not the stock connector. I actually bored it out and put in this US standard, whatever you want to call it, connector. It fits the Harris ones rather than the weird other connectors that it used to fit. It looks similar on the radio. The stock connector for HF looks similar, but it's actually different size and fits a different antenna base rather than these Harris fellers, and they're kind of tough to get a hold of. So I got the Harris one, I slapped it in there, worked reasonably. At least hardware wise, it worked great. It made great electrical and RF connections to the board. That's all I can say for that. For the VHF and UHF connectors, this little TNC guy, it gets loose pretty easy, so it'll start to wobble on you. So I had to kind of glue it down a little bit to kind of firm it up again. I added this grounding lug right here because this thing absolutely needs grounding on HF. Otherwise, it is 100% garbage rather than 90% garbage. The connector right here, this is not the stock connector. I also replaced this in a vain attempt to polish this turd. The old one was what's called a YC12 connector, and yeah, I just swapped that out because I wanted to use these actual handsets rather than the supplied fake H250. This connector right here, this is for computer interface and firmware updates. This is YC8 or whatever. And yeah, we had to actually build our own cables to upload firmware. It does come with the computer interface cable, but does not come with the firmware update cable. So we had to actually build that ourselves to test out and try and help Gouhe refine their product that is extremely half-baked, if that. You have these two SMAs up here, one for GPS, one that's completely unused. Neat. This panel right here looks similar because it's basically this front panel of their Q900. The guts are similar to the Q900. I opened it up, I took a look and took pictures, and it is essentially a Q900 with a few modifications, I guess. But the guts are essentially the same as the Q900, just in a beefier box. For the accessories, they are garbage. Yay. The HF antenna is a clone of a real-life military style antenna, but it's missing all the guts that made the military style one, the actual military one, do what it's supposed to do. So it's mainly just a fancy showpiece. Yeah, the supplied HF antenna does not do what it's supposed to do. It lets water ingress into its base, which causes it to short, and just doesn't have the matching circuitry that the actual real one that's trying to emulate has. So that's cool. My VHF UHF antenna was made of terrible plastic rubber material, and it just kind of fell apart. The handset, this is not the stock handset. This is an actual military grade, military H250 modified, or I don't know, the one with the volume is different. H250 VC-EB. I like the volume knob. The actual supplied one was an H250 clone that is very cheap, plasticky feeling. The cable is thinner. It didn't have a good feel, and it had that YC12 connector on the end that, I don't know, wasn't a huge fan of. And yeah, like I said, we had to build specialized cables ourselves. And the battery. The battery's connected right here, and it's not terrible. It's really not a bad battery. It has capacity. It's heavy as hell, but it has some decent capacity. It lasts a good amount of time out in the field. It's kind of the only redeeming feature, but the battery's expensive. It's hard to get a hold of spares. Charging it can be finicky. And I opened one up because I had two, and I wanted to see what the guts were. And it's basically just a bunch of lithium cells inset and some rubber. So nothing really to write home about. Nothing that's worth the heavy price tag they put on it. But whatever, this whole thing's been a disappointment, so why stop there? Any accessories, if you want to get them, it looks like they have a little bit more support for accessories on the GouheTec website, last time I checked. But you still have to jump through some hoops if you do want to get replacement anything on this radio. And forget it if you want to actually get a replacement radio if yours inevitably breaks or just comes broken. You have to fix it yourself or deal with it or whatever. This thing is now a shelf queen for me because it is RF wise completely useless. All right. Once again, I could talk forever about the hardware, my gripes there. Let's move on to the public relations, the customer support. Mr. BrianC has been the main interface between us two when talking to Gouhe and their technicians about getting firmware and asking questions about the radio and trying to help them refine it back when we were really doing that. But as of recently, it seems that they have kind of stonewalled him because he gave a frank opinion on a firmware update. Apparently, instead of in the DMs, he made the mortal sin of posting it in their Signal chat, which has anyone who wants to talk to support in. So it's a pretty decent sized Signal chat. It's got a bunch of people in there asking about, the Q900, the PMR-171, and the TBR-119. It's their little support channel. And so he posted for everyone to see that, hey, this firmware has this issue now. Apparently that was enough to get him blackballed from really, any support. Which is interesting because he was the one doing a lot of the work trying to help them figure out their product for free on his own time. So, yeah, they're not exactly the brightest in strategery for that. not a cool move. Support kind of sucks. Like, it's neat that they do have a Signal channel, but you can tell that when they get overloaded with questions and criticism, they kind of shut down and they just aren't very professional about it. There's a lot more to be said, but honestly, it's not really worth my time. Too long didn't read of it all is don't buy the TBR-119 unless some major improvements are done on the TBR-119. I would steer well clear from the TBR-119, as well as the Q900 and the PMR-171, which is their other offerings, because it appears to be using the same type of firmware, same guts, same internals, just different packaging. So essentially, you'd be getting the same thing, running into the same problems, or maybe some new and interesting problems. But either way, this place is a nothing burger. Avoid it, save your money, get something good. And I'm not bagging on Chinese-made radios. Chinese-made radios have been a major source of new amateur radio operators in the hobby because people can get their hands on Baofangs and Wuxans, all this stuff. I have nothing bad to say for those. Fantastic. I myself, like I said, run a Quansheng UVK5 along with a Xiegu X6100. Fantastic bang for your buck. And I have zero complaints with those. So I was hoping that the TBR-119 would be kind of like a cheaper variant of an actual mil-spec radio, when in fact it is not. It is a Potemkin's village of a radio, avoided at all costs, as well as our other offerings. Gouhe, if you see this, sorry, not sorry, do better. If you want to sell something, at least, make it do what it says in the box. And don't give your customers attitude when they bring up that, hey, this thing I spent a lot of money on is having issues. I had hardware issues, we have software issues, we brought them up. We still have no solution. This is still a useless radio that will take up space on my shelf. I might go and shoot it, but at the same time, it's like I'm still holding out a teeny bit of hope for maybe some amazing firmware update that fixes all the problems, all the, firmware update that'll make my connectors not loose and, make it so that my FM deviates and my SSB actually sounds like a human voice rather than a robot. It's pretty unlikely. So until that day, it'll remain on the shelf, and until that day, my opinion of this radio and Gouhe as a company in general is very, very negative. I'll probably make more videos in the future going over other radios. Probably not this radio because it's no longer worth my time. And till next time, this is Nicky.